Something just shifted in the Strait of Hormuz, and almost nobody outside a few rooms in the Pentagon, in Beijing and in Tehran, understands what actually happened. One narrow piece of space hardware quietly changed hands. One capability that the United States Navy has counted on for 30 years stopped being a guarantee. And the most important shipping lane in the world, the lane that moves roughly 1/5 of all the oil consumed on this planet, just turned into a kill box that the markets have not priced in yet. This is not a war story. Not yet. This is the moment before the war story. The moment where one side realizes the map has changed, and the other side is not woken up. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what changed, who pays the price, why oil could move violently before the next quarterly earnings season, and why senior planners at U.S. Central Command are reportedly already rewriting carrier movement plans they considered untouchable just months ago. Let me walk you straight into what happened, because the timing tells you almost everything. What is confirmed by multiple sources is that China and Iran have spent the past several years deepening a strategic partnership that goes far beyond cheap oil purchases and trade workarounds. Beijing has provided Tehran with diplomatic cover, banking lifelines, sanctions evasion infrastructure, drone components, and quiet technical assistance across a long list of dual-use sectors. The reading from analysts is that the most consequential layer of that relationship has now moved into space. Iran's satellite ambitions are not new. Tehran has been launching small reconnaissance and communications platforms for years. What is new is the operational quality. Recent commercial imagery analysts have flagged a pattern. Iran's geospatial intelligence cycle has tightened. The gap between an event happening at sea and Iranian forces being able to see it, target it, and respond to it has shrunk dramatically. That is not the kind of jump a country makes alone. That is the kind of jump a country makes when somebody hands them the missing piece. Here is where the plan starts falling apart for the United States. For 3 decades, American naval dominance in the Persian Gulf rested on one simple advantage. The U.S. Navy could see Iran. Iran could not really see the U.S. Navy. Carrier strike groups operated inside a one-sided information bubble. American P-8 Poseidons watched the coast. American MQ-9 drones loitered overhead. American satellites tracked every Iranian fastboat the moment it left Bandar Abbas. Iranian commanders, by contrast, operated with patchy radar, limited maritime patrol aircraft, and a heavy dependence on coastal observation. That is the gap that defined deterrence in the Gulf. That gap is now closing, and the closer it gets to zero, the less protective American firepower actually becomes, because firepower without surprise is just expensive metal. What this strongly suggests is that Iran is no longer guessing where American assets are. Iran is being shown. Persistent overhead coverage, even modest in resolution, even shared with delays measured in minutes rather than seconds, transforms the equation. The Strait of Hormuz is only 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. A supertanker takes hours to clear it. A U.S. destroyer takes about the same. Inside that geography, a few hundred well-placed anti-ship missiles, a swarm of small craft, and a real-time picture of where the American ships actually are is not a defensive posture. It is an offensive option. And the moment Tehran has that option fully matured, the calculation Washington has relied on, that any Iranian aggression in the Strait would be self-destructive, weakens by the hour. Now here is the part most people are missing. The risk is not that Iran starts a war. The risk is that Iran no longer needs to. Markets do not care whether oil tankers are actually sunk. Markets care whether the threat is credible. And the threat just became more credible than at any point in the last 20 years. Insurance underwriters in London have already started revisiting Gulf transit premiums. Tanker brokers are quietly rerouting some flexible cargoes. Refiners on the U.S. East Coast and in Western Europe are watching freight rates the way day traders watch a Fed announcement. Because every basis point on a tanker rate, every dollar on a barrel of Brent, every spike in a war risk premium translates, very fast, into gasoline at the pump, jet fuel for airlines, diesel for trucking, and inflation pressure inside an economy that thought it had finally beaten inflation. That is the part Wall Street has not fully priced in. But here is where the story really starts to bite. The Pentagon knows. And what is confirmed across multiple defense analysts is that U.S. carrier strike group deployments in the region have been quietly adjusted over the last several rotations. The Theodore Roosevelt, the Eisenhower before her, and the rotations through Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain have all been moving with more caution than press releases suggest. Carriers are spending less time inside the Gulf and more time in the broader Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman. The official language is operational flexibility. The reading from analysts is risk management, because once you accept that an adversary can see your most expensive ship in near real time, the calculus changes from projecting power to protecting force. And a carrier that has to protect itself first is not a deterrent. It is a target you happen to be defending. That sounds small until you follow the money. The price of every consumer good downstream of a barrel of oil is sitting on top of a single assumption: that the Strait of Hormuz will keep flowing, every day, without interruption. Roughly 20 million barrels a day pass through that narrow water. That is more than the entire daily consumption of the United States. That is the lifeblood of Asian manufacturing. That is the input that keeps European industry alive after Russian pipeline gas was cut. If Hormuz becomes a contested space, even psychologically, even without a single shot fired, the spread between paper oil and physical oil widens. Tanker day rates climb. Producers in the Gulf demand higher prices to compensate for risk, and every central banker in the developed world watches their inflation models break in real time. The last time something like this happened was 1973. The last time the global economy absorbed an oil shock of meaningful size was 2022, after the invasion of Ukraine. We have not recovered from either of those shocks yet. Another one would land on an economy that is already structurally fragile. And this is where the map tells a different story. Look at where Iran sits. Iran does not need to invade anyone. Iran does not need to occupy territory. Iran needs to maintain a credible threat over a narrow stretch of water. That is achievable with shore-based missiles, fast attack craft, mines, drones, and now, satellite reconnaissance. The mines have been there for years. The missiles have been there for years. The drones came online during the Yemen campaign. What was always missing was the eye in the sky. China just gave them the eye in the sky. The trap only works if the other side plays along. And right now the other side, meaning Washington and the markets, is still operating on the old map. The map where Iran could threaten but never see. The map where carriers were sanctuaries. That map is gone. But that is not the part causing panic inside U.S. planning circles. The part causing panic is what comes next. Because once a satellite handoff happens once, the precedent is set. The question stops being whether China will help Iran see the strait. The question becomes, how much? Beijing has built a vast network of low Earth orbit imaging satellites in the last decade. China's commercial imaging companies, many of them state-adjacent, now operate constellations that rival or exceed Western providers in revisit time. If even a fraction of that capacity is made available to Tehran, on a discrete, deniable basis, Iran's situational awareness over the Gulf becomes comparable to the awareness America used to enjoy unilaterally. And that is not a temporary fix. That is a permanent rebalancing. Here is the part that makes the next 72 hours matter more than the last 7 days. The Trump administration is currently engaged in active negotiations with Beijing across multiple tracks: trade, rare earths, semiconductors, Taiwan, Iran sanctions enforcement. Each of those tracks is now contaminated by a question the White House did not want to ask out loud. Does Beijing actually want any of these deals to work? Or is Beijing using engagement as cover while it quietly reshapes the strategic environment in places like the Persian Gulf? The pattern points to the second answer, because handing Iran improved overhead coverage is not the move of a partner. It is the move of a competitor who has decided that complicating American power is more valuable than the marginal benefit of any single bilateral deal. The mistake was not the move itself, it was the timing. Beijing's quiet upgrade of Iranian capabilities lands at the exact moment the United States is trying to project a posture of negotiated stability with both China and Iran simultaneously. Washington wants to talk about tariffs. Washington wants to talk about TikTok. Washington wants to talk about a possible managed thaw on Taiwan. And underneath all of that, the strategic floor is being moved. The leverage is being repositioned. Every time an American official says the relationship is stable, an Iranian missile officer somewhere along the Hormuz coast gets a clearer picture of a U.S. destroyer than he had the month before. That is the gap between the language of diplomacy and the reality of capability. and capability always wins. Now let me bring in the energy markets piece, because this is where the consequences become brutally concrete. According to current reporting from energy analysts who track Gulf flows, the geographic concentration of risk is staggering. Saudi Arabia exports the majority of its crude through the strait. The United Arab Emirates does as well. Kuwait, Qatar with LNG, Iraq's southern fields, all of them rely on that one corridor. Even Iran's own exports flow through it. The narrative that Iran would never threaten Hormuz because it depends on the same waterway has always been partially comforting and partially wrong. Tehran has demonstrated more than once a willingness to accept short-term pain to extract long-term political concessions. Mining the strait in the 1980s, seizing tankers in the 2010s, harassing commercial shipping during periods of maximum tension. The pattern is consistent. Iran uses Hormuz as leverage, not as sanctuary. What the new satellite picture does is sharpen that leverage. Before, Iran could threaten the strait, but had to do so blindly, accepting massive losses from American counterstrikes. Now, Iran can threaten the strait with eyes open, picking targets, timing strikes, exploiting the gaps in American patrol cycles. The cost of any retaliation Washington considers goes up. The deterrent value of the U.S. Navy goes down. And the only thing standing between an oil shock and the global economy is whether Tehran decides to use a capability it now possesses or to hold it in reserve as bargaining power. Either way, the option exists, and options that exist eventually get exercised. If this escalates further, the next move could be a calibrated incident. Not a war, a demonstration. A near miss against a Western tanker. A coordinated drone overflight of a U.S. asset. A test of the new awareness, designed to remind the world that the rules have changed. Even one such incident would push Brent crude higher overnight. Even the rumor of such an incident is currently moving spot rates in tanker insurance markets. One realistic scenario is that the next 90 days produce at least one significant Hormuz incident, designed to signal the new balance of power. Should that line be crossed, the consequence would likely be a fast repricing of oil, an immediate political crisis inside an American administration that is bet on transactional diplomacy with both Beijing and Tehran, and a credibility shock that rolls outward to allies in Asia who are watching whether American deterrence still holds. And this is exactly where it backfired for anyone who thought the U.S.-China relationship had stabilized. Stability was always a surface reading. Underneath the surface, Beijing has continued to invest in every capability that complicates American freedom of action. Naval expansion in the South China Sea, anti-satellite testing, cyber probing of American grid infrastructure, and now, satellite-enabled targeting support for a regional partner sitting on top of the world's most critical choke point. Each move is individually deniable. Each move is individually small. Together, they form a coherent strategy of slow erosion. America's adversaries no longer try to defeat American power head-on. They try to make it expensive. They try to make it slow. They try to make every American decision in every theater a little harder than it would have been the year before. That is the strategy, and it is working. Here is what to watch in the next 2 weeks. First, watch carrier movement reports. If the U.S. Navy slows its transit into the Gulf or holds carriers in the broader Arabian Sea, that is your confirmation that the Pentagon takes this seriously. Second, watch tanker insurance markets. Lloyd's of London tracks Gulf War risk premiums daily. A persistent rise of even 10 basis points signals that underwriters believe the threat profile has changed. Third, watch any official Iranian statement that references deterrence parity, or balanced awareness, or transparent skies. Those phrases, if they appear, are Tehran's way of telegraphing the new reality without naming it. Fourth, watch Beijing's silence. The louder the silence on Iran, the more we know the partnership has matured. And fifth, watch the oil curve. If the futures market suddenly puts a premium on near-dated contracts versus longer-dated ones, that backwardation is the market saying it expects supply disruptions sooner rather than later. That is the early warning gauge. The real damage is not on the battlefield. The real damage is on the credit of American deterrence. For a generation, allies in the Gulf, in East Asia, and in Europe trusted that the United States Navy could keep the sea lanes open. That trust is the most valuable asset Washington owns. It is worth more than any single weapons system. It is the reason the dollar remains the world's reserve currency. It is the reason Allied capital flows into U.S. treasuries, even when domestic politics looks chaotic. Erode that trust, even at the margins, and the cost of being America rises. Bond yields rise. The dollar weakens at the edges. Allies start hedging quietly with Beijing, and the entire economic architecture built on American security guarantees becomes a little more fragile every month. This is the part most people miss when they look at a single news story like a satellite transfer. They see a technical event. They miss the systemic consequence. A single satellite is just one device. A single satellite shared with Iran is a signal that the strategic environment has flipped in a corner of the world that supplies the energy that runs the global economy. That signal is what matters. That signal is what the Pentagon is currently absorbing in closed-door briefings. That signal is what Beijing intended to send. And that signal is what oil markets, for now, have decided to ignore. But ignoring a signal does not make it go away. It just delays the repricing. And the longer the delay, the sharper the move when it finally arrives. We have seen this pattern before. We saw it in early 2022, when European energy traders refused to believe that Russian gas could really be cut off, right up until the moment it was. We saw it in 1973, when American consumers refused to believe an oil embargo could really happen, right up until the moment they were sitting in gas lines that stretched around the block. Markets are slow to wake up to structural change. But when they finally do, they move all at once. And the people positioned ahead of that move take everything. The people positioned behind it pay the bill. What is confirmed across all credible reporting is that the Strait of Hormuz is the most critical choke point in the global energy system. What is confirmed is that Iran has steadily improved its anti-access capabilities for 2 decades. What is confirmed is that China has provided Iran with a steady stream of strategic and technical support. The new variable, the analysis layer, is how much that quiet support has compressed Iran's decision time inside the Gulf. The scenario layer, the part that has not happened yet, is what Tehran chooses to do with that compression. Whether they use it as leverage in negotiations, whether they use it to test American patience, or whether they use it to extract a major concession on sanctions and nuclear policy, with a single, calibrated demonstration somewhere along the Hormuz coast. So here is where this lands. The Strait of Hormuz has not closed. The carriers have not been hit. The oil price has not spiked. But the conditions for all 3 of those things to become possible just shifted in a way that almost nobody outside specialized rooms is talking about. Beijing made a quiet move. Tehran absorbed a powerful capability. Washington is now playing on a board where the geometry has changed and the pieces look the same. The market is the last to find out, which is exactly how every major repricing in modern history has begun. The Pentagon already knows. The insurance underwriters already know. Allied capitals in the Gulf already know. Eventually the headlines will catch up, and at that point, the move will already be priced. The window between now and that moment is the only window that matters. Watch the carriers. Watch the insurance premiums. Watch Beijing's silence. Watch the oil curve. And remember the date on this video, because in 6 months, when somebody asks why oil moved violently and the dollar moved with it, you will already know. The Hormuz edge that defined American power in the Gulf for 30 years has just quietly evaporated. The world has not noticed yet, but the world is about to.